Hello and welcome to today's episode of Health University, where I have the pleasure of meeting my colleague and new friend, Dr. Lisa Lewis. Dr. Lewis is going to talk to us about the adrenal fertility connection and the impact of adrenal health on conception, how to test it, and how to treat it. Dr. Lewis is a leading licensed naturopathic functional medicine doctor, an acupuncturist, a nutritional endocrinologist, a hormone health expert, a speaker, and the author of, and I love this title, Stop Stressing Me Out: 7 Solutions to Overcome Overwhelm and Conquer Disease Naturally. That's beautiful. She's been instrumental in empowering women for over 2 decades to take charge of their health by addressing the root cause, and that's the functional medicine component that I'm sure we'll get a little peek into. And she uses the combination of natural medicine, Chinese medicine, and Western medicine to help her patients realize their whole health and their optimal health and an improved quality of life, to be sure. So welcome, Dr. Lewis. May I call you Dr. Lisa, Dr. Lewis? How do you prefer to be?
Anything.
Okay, well, I'll call you Dr. Lisa just so that we can be somewhat professional and somewhat personal. So
Yeah.
welcome. Is there anything that I missed in your intro that you want to make sure the
No,
listeners learn about you?
so informative. You always try to make sure that you try and put so much in, but the bios are really like that intro to who we are. But we'll get into more of the details. So I think.
Exactly. People will get to know who you are as they hear you for sure. But those are some
Yeah.
pretty impressive credentials. So I think that they're worthy of being spoken to.
Yeah.
So with regard to adrenal and fertility health, you
Mhm.
and I just spoke a little bit off camera about how this is especially important in my experience, and I presume in yours as well, for patients who are in that little bit later in life. They're trying to conceive and they're in their maybe late 30s, early 40s, mid 40s, and we've just had more time to tax our adrenals. So it's
Mhm.
important to consider those. What
Mhm.
would you say about adrenal imbalances and particularly cortisol levels as they
Mhm.
affect fertility? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So this is a immense topic. So we'll try and pare it down as much as possible. But there's so many imbalances that show up when we have adrenal issues, right? And we know that people always say, oh, to get pregnant or to hold the baby, right? Reduce your stress. But they never really explain what it is about the stress that's actually either preventing pregnancy or preventing people from actually going to term.
Yes.
So I think adrenals get a bad rap because everybody keeps thinking about adrenal fatigue, right?
Hmm.
When it's really adrenal imbalances,
Hmm.
right? Because there's so many different ways that the adrenals can be elevated at certain times of the day, can be low at other times of the day, but all are really meaning that the body is releasing so much cortisol, and that cortisol is kind of stealing. We call it the pregnenolone steal. It's stealing a lot of the reproductive hormones, so it's preventing the body from being able to go through its natural process of creating hormones and making the proper cascade of hormones. And so I think that one of the big issues is that most women, it steals a lot of the progesterone, right?
Hmm.
And then that ends up making the cycles irregular or shortens the cycles. And so there's just so much involved in it, but it really is a clear indication that that cortisol is stealing and
Hmm.
kind of taking the hormones and shunting it toward the cortisol response because we're going to prioritize survival before we prioritize reproduction, right?
Absolutely.
The body's like, why reproduce if you're not
Yeah.
going to live, right?
And obviously it's not a thought, it's not a thoughtful thing. It is a primitive response that if we are
Exactly.
in perceived stress, we
Yeah.
will elevate cortisol. And frankly, I also would purport cortisol gets a little bit of a bad rap in general. We need cortisol. It is our resource for getting fuel and blood sugar stores out and into our muscles so that we can, move and be active and create. However, when we have this persistent cortisol is when we see the steal. Would you say that that is so?
Yes, and I really like to consider it more chronic.
Hmm.
chronic release of cortisol, because naturally our bodies will release the cortisol, it'll go up and then it'll go right back down. But we're running from the proverbial tiger or lion all day, whether it's light energy, like too much light in the morning, or whether or not it sounds. A lot of people sleep with their television on, so they're never really getting that relaxation response, whether or not it's driving,
Yeah.
commuting, and just so many reasons why cortisol is just pumped into our system, and it never really gets a chance to get back to its steady state. And so from that point, the body has just gotten used to it and says, well, I guess this is my natural state, so I'm going to go with it and just keep producing that cortisol. And that's when you'll start to see like irregular cycles, heavy menses, cramping, and how we like to say in Chinese medicine, liver qi stagnation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And then we eventually get that maybe that little bit of extra little belly fat as the cortisol, lays down to preserve our organs. And then
Yeah.
we get that wired tired at night. And so we're not getting restorative, remodeled sleep.
Yeah.
I love that you mentioned, that we're, going to sleep with the TV on or the tablets open, because blue light, right? As you said, it's the
Yeah.
fuel for our eyes. It's telling us that we're still awake, that it's broad daylight when
Yeah.
it's dark o'clock.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
then another important thing is that it's especially to consider like the healthy baby, right? I find that the immune system and inflammation are also kind of pushed aside. And cortisol is the strongest anti-inflammatory known in man, right? It's really kind of what prednisone was created from, right? Or
Mhm.
created to
Mhm.
mimic, right? And
Mhm.
so with the cortisol being too high, it will promote inflammation.
Mhm.
But if it's too low, it can't prevent inflammation, right? And so there's a huge influx of inflammatory responses and inflammation, and so many problems with fertility show up because they have elevated levels of inflammation, and no one is really addressing that. And I even think, it's probably not necessarily the it's probably theory at this point, but I do believe when many people come to me for fertility support, and or sent from IVF for IVF and IUI, because
Mhm.
I'm also an acupuncturist, right? So I support them in that way. I always encourage them to use natural medicine because we want that inflammation to be as low as possible, not just for conception, but to make sure that the baby isn't exposed as it's growing through inflammation, because it can affect the nervous system and the immune system so much, right? And so we just want to get them to be healthy as possible. And so to really prevent so many things, to work on so many systems. But many people are like, oh, just give me the shot.
Right, right, right.
I
Right.
just want to get
And
pregnant.
if I may, I'll expand upon that a little bit to
Yeah,
say that, of course, yes, we want a sort of a healthy uterine environment for the baby to grow, but you will also see those inflammatory chemicals in the follicular fluid of
yeah,
the egg that is growing. So it's
yeah,
not just when you get that positive pregnancy test that it's time to pay attention. You want to do so ideally 6 months before you're going to try to conceive, at
exactly.
least 3 months before you're trying to conceive. And of course, no, we don't want to create stress here. If you're already in the game, there is no time like the present.
That's right.
Now is the time. So
That's right.
that's
That's
wonderful.
right.
How would you have your patients check their cortisol levels? Do you use blood serum? Do you use saliva? Tell us about how you do it.
Yeah. So there's two different ways. I will start normally with saliva,
Mhm.
only because just think about the blood test, right? So if there's a circadian rhythm for the cortisol. So it's
Mhm.
high in the morning to wake us up and get us ready for the day, right? And
Mhm.
as the day goes down by, it goes down, down, down. And then at night, really low to help you go to sleep.
Mhm.
Imagine trying to get your blood drawn at 4 times throughout the day to check that cortisol level. Like, no.
Right. It would raise your cortisol.
Exactly, right? So I love the fact that the saliva test is can kind of be first line, but it also tells us so much more than the blood, right?
Mhm.
The blood is helping us to understand like what's floating through the bloodstream, not what's not being used, right? Saliva is what we consider a functional test. And that test is telling us what's happening functionally to the body, right? So we can see what's happening with estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, cortisol, DHEA, all in one test,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And then if we know that there's some significant imbalances, many times I'll use the urine analysis because the urine test will not just tell us about all of those individual hormones, but it'll also tell us what those metabolites, what they break down to, how our body's utilizing the hormone. Because say someone says, "Oh, I have estrogen dominance, so I have too much estrogen." Well, what is that estrogen being broken down to, right? We have three different forms of estrogen, right? And so, but that primary estrogen is going to be broken down to in three ways. It's going to be broken down to what we consider a 2-hydroxy, a 4-hydroxy, and a 16-hydroxy estrone, right? And so, or estriol, or even estradiol. So when we understand what it's broken down to, then we can really get a good feel for what kind of imbalances are showing up and or what deficiencies are showing up and really pinpoint it. I call it bullseye work, right? We get to the direct biochemical reaction that's creating the imbalance. And we want more in the 2OH because that's protective
Mhm.
and a whole lot less than a 4OH because that's what's going to start to shift DNA, right? And so,
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah, it's a, and that's just one piece, right? We could be here all day talking about
Right. Right.
all the different metabolites, and it'll tell you about like BPA, so those
Mhm.
the estrogen mimickers, right? And so many times someone might have elevated estrogen because their BPA is elevated. So it can tell us not just what's happening, but why. And that's the real power of functional testing because it helps us get to the root cause so much faster, and then we can help solve the problem. And that's why we have such success, right?
That's
In
right.
medicine and holistic medicine with
Absolutely.
fertility. Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to, put a pin in this, in the estrogen BPA conversation. Did I hear you say correctly that the saliva test or the urine test will show BPA levels?
Yeah, so I do use, it depends on the lab, but I do use one of the labs, Vibrant America, that actually will, in the urine test, the urine metabolite test, it does test BPA. So it depends
That's
on,
really
so,
important.
so it just depends, so I'll use a different lab based on what I believe the true challenges are. So I
Mhm.
don't have to run a full toxicity panel, right? Because we
Mhm.
can run a full toxicity panel, but that's going to run another $500-$600. And so it's
Mhm.
a lot of times in trying to really keep the testing costs down. And so I try
Mhm.
to get as many tests as possible in one or two tests. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
for people early on, I'll start with that saliva test. Depending on how far out, right, they are in their conception desires, right, and their goals. But the urine test is really going to support helping to understand truly that cascade, the hormone cascade. I do like to use both, though. I know some people only use urine, the urinalysis or the Dutch or those kind of tests. But sometimes I feel like the cortisol isn't quite as accurate in the urine
Mhm.
as it is the saliva. So I like to do so. If I do that, I'll probably do the Dutch Complete
Gotcha.
or Vibrant America. I can use. They have two separate tests. So I run both.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So somebody comes back, they take the Dutch Complete, they've done the saliva, they've done the urine. You're noticing that that the estrogen dominance, and I'm putting that in air quotes because it's not
Yeah.
that they have too much estrogen, it's that they're not metabolizing, clearing estrogen. So it's almost like a facade of
Yeah.
estrogen floating
Or
around.
Or it could be that their progesterone is low, but
Yes,
their estrogen is elevated. So the estrogen is elevated relative to the progesterone, right? So
exactly.
yeah, so I
Exactly.
mean, it's just a matter of how you read it and understanding
Mhm,
that. But yeah, so I
mhm.
didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry.
No,
I just
no,
wanted to
this is a conversation. There's no cutting off. This is just we're chatting, and that's how it happens. We get engaged in the conversation. Thank you for sharing in our conversation here at Health University. One of the ways in which we help people improve their fertility is through our 5-element fertility quiz. Please click on the link below at yourfertilityquiz.com and take this short quiz. You'll receive a free report that includes easy to implement ideas to improve your whole health and your fertile health. Now let's return to our topic in today's episode. So if this person shows elevated estrogens, what do you do to help clear that in terms
so
of getting her ready for her next IVF cycle or natural conception?
yeah, so one of the important things is like when looking at that cascade, right? If the estrogen is elevated, then I'm for sure going to do the urinalysis or the
Mhm.
urine test, right? Because then that's going to tell me exactly why it may be elevated.
Mhm.
And it'll also tell me what herbs, what minerals, what nutrients, what things I need to do to help bring it. Because depending on what part of the cascade, and the estrogen, the elevation is, whether it's in that 4-OH or 2-OH or 16-OH, it'll say then, hey, use dim or you make sure they eat more cruciferous vegetables or whatever. Like it'll give me so much clarity because I
Mhm.
can look directly at that one and say,
Mhm.
here's the pinpointed. But I'm always gonna work on the liver, right? I'm always gonna
Well, that's what the
cleanse.
DIM is doing anyway, is working on the liver to help
Exactly.
neutralize that pathway. So, and personally, I love DIM. I think that we all,
Yeah.
just given our environment, we could
Yes.
all benefit from having more DIM and fiber. And yes, it's derived from cruciferous vegetables, but I don't know about you, I can't eat that many cruciferous vegetables to get the quantity of DIM I need for that liver clearance
I don't
support.
think anyone can eat that many.
Exactly, exactly.
They'd have more problems if trying to eat
That's
about
right.
10 pounds of
Right. They'd be coming back with the
cauliflower.
digestive issues. Yes. Is there anything else you do in addition to the DIM and the
Yeah.
dietary improvements? Do you do things like sauna or something like that?
I have a infrared sauna in the office, so I love, love, love. Right. Depending on where they are in their process, I won't do a deep detox, right? But sauna for about 20 to 30 minutes. You can do it almost every day if you need to. But for those who don't have sauna, I just, have them, go on a nice hot shower and just kind of release. Make sure they walk,
Mhm.
right? Make sure they're at least getting 20 to 30 minutes of a relaxing walk, right? Because one of the big problems with exercise is that it can push the cortisol level through the
Mhm.
roof. And
Mhm.
so the last thing we want to do is put more stress on the body, but we're machines, right? On some level. So we have to move. And a lot
Yeah.
of people are just stuck in their seats and stuck
Yeah.
in their lifestyle. So movement is key.
Yeah.
Meditation.
Circulation, not exertion, is the way I like to say it.
Yes, yes, joyful, fun movement,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and then yoga, calm yoga, Pilates, like calm things of that nature. But meditation is a huge one,
Mhm.
right? Because if we're talking about stress and adrenals, what we really have to do is go deep inside and start to understand, like, where is that stress in my world? Because most people don't connect with stress. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I'll ask people, like, where are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Where do you feel like you're stressed? If 1 is like barely any and 10 is just like off the chain, right? And they'll say, oh, maybe about a 3 or 4. And then I'll ask them to explain their day or explain their week. And it's literally stressing me out hearing all the right,
Yeah.
hearing that the schedules.
Yeah.
And I have to say do we really think, I mean, now that you've mention and they start listening and they're
Right.
like,
Now
oh,
that you said it out loud, do you hear yourself? Mhm.
definitely not the connection, right? And because our lifestyles have become that, right?
Absolutely.
That norm,
Absolutely. Yeah.
unfortunately.
It's
So
so
meditation
hard.
is a huge piece. And it doesn't have to be the sitting there for an hour. It
Right.
could be the deep breathing, the deep
Hmm.
belly breathing, just kind of taking yourself off to I call it Shangri-La, your la
Hmm.
la land, and just being present to yourself and manifesting and just shifting, putting your mind in a place where you want to be. And I always, and even on the table, I do a visualization, right?
Hmm.
A nice visualization with them. So when they're going off to sleep with their acupuncture needles in there, they're in that space.
Yeah.
But I also
Such a
ask them to
healing space.
call in the baby,
Yeah.
right? Like call in, like imagine yourself holding
Mhm.
and being in that space because the baby is not going to want to come into this chaotic environment, right?
Mhm.
And so a lot of that really helps them to just get in the mothering and nurturing way. And we always know what the standard is, right? The moment you tell somebody, oh, stop trying, is when their stress goes down and that boom, they get pregnant, right?
Right,
And
right.
so,
Sometimes
well, of
yes, I
course,
want, if there's a listener out there saying, don't be saying those words to me because every time someone tells me, stop stressing, it's
yes,
stressful and it's hurtful and all of that. But there really, yes, I would say, if I may just rephrase it from my own ears,
mhm,
when we take the fire down a
yes,
bit, when we
mhm,
make room with just bigger breaths, when we put our face to the sun, when we get our proper sleep, we are
yes,
literally making space in our bodies. And we
100,
know that nature abhors that vacuum. So guess what? We just make more opportunity for life to come in.
yes,
Obviously, there's no guarantee, but it makes more opportunity for
right,
us to be feathering our nest, so to
right,
speak.
right. And remember, those are also tools and strategies that you're using along with the supplements, the food, along with the understanding of what to use from a herbal standpoint and all of that, right? So it's a full complex experience
Mhm.
where you're really taking every aspect of yourself and shifting it as
Mhm.
opposed to just narrowly focusing on what the hormones are saying. We get an opportunity to really take stock of our lives and say, wow, like this is what I kind of desired. I just didn't really know how to get there. And so doing the work really helps people to get into that to
Mhm.
that feeling, loving, being space as opposed to the doing and going space.
Mhm. Yeah, we can't chase down the baby.
Yes, yes,
And we don't know. Life is capital L life, God, whatever name you want
yes,
to give it, universal power. We
yes,
don't know, but we have to be fully engaged and then
yes,
fully surrendered. And I
yes,
have a friend who's been a teacher for a very long time, Dr. Randine Lewis, who would
mhm,
say things like, fertility is not pregnancy for a reason. We need to prepare the
mhm,
soil so
yeah.
that the seed can be planted, so that the harvest can grow.
And
And we
it's
tend to
fertile
think of
ground.
fertility as
Yeah,
being pregnancy.
yeah.
I forget about the
Love,
fertility part. Just give me that baby. Well,
love that.
I'm not seeing them in the supermarket to go
Yeah,
pick up and check out your baby at the counter. We really need to
yeah,
prepare ourselves, and
yeah,
I think that is, and then in so doing, and I'm sure you're going to agree with me on this, Dr. Lisa. When we do this, we feel more of being the divine feminine, whatever you want to call it. We feel more of being prepared
yeah.
to gestate this other being that will be coming in.
Yes, and I love the way you mentioned the divine feminine because that's another part of the stress picture, right? So many women have to put on and wear every hat,
Mhm.
right? Basically, I don't know how old you are, but
Oh,
remember
I'm
the commercial.
66.
Okay. So remember bring home the bacon and fry it up in
Oh,
the pan.
yes, I
Remember
do.
that?
Yes,
Right?
I do.
So So we also have to give ourselves the space and the me time to get back into that feminine space
Mhm.
after being maybe in a masculine workforce or work world all day, and or
Mhm.
having to wear the hat sometimes of both parents because maybe
Mhm.
one spouse isn't home doing things, at different schedules. And
Mhm.
there's just tons of ways that we can reconnect with self. I mean, you wouldn't believe that, belly dancing. Like
Yes.
I definitely I search for belly dancing classes like all over the country to say,
Mhm.
hey, there's a belly dancing class in XYZ town. You
Uh,
might want to try that. Or I'll even teach them and show them. I'm not a belly dancer, by the way.
yeah.
But there's certain moves because you're opening up the pelvic or you're just connecting again. So anything that you can do that makes you feel like a woman again,
Mhm.
right? Like that helps you sit back into that space is
Mhm.
really going to help not just bring that cortisol level down, but also help you call in that divine energy,
Yes.
divine
And,
feminine.
and for
Yeah,
the listeners, I want to make sure that you hear us, that we're not saying just go be the divine feminine. We know that we need to live and work,
that's
and
right.
we are made of both masculine and feminine, and
That's
we
right.
need to be, and we should be. But I
That's right.
think that the point that we're discussing here is that there is a tendency,
Mhm.
society has us push more toward that
Yeah.
masculine check off the checklist, have your 15 minutes of increments of Zoom calls. And there's not the feminine side that says, you know what, I'm going to block 15 minutes, take a breath, have a
Right.
glass of water, have a snack, look to the sun, listen to some music, listen to
Yeah.
my own thoughts for a moment.
Me
The
time.
yeah,
Me time.
exactly.
Me time. Right.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
many women that I speak with and work with don't have me time carved out on
Yeah,
their schedules,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And they're giving all their energy to everyone else all day
Mhm.
long. And that me time is so important. And we're all guilty of it,
Oh
right?
yeah. Oh yeah.
Filling that schedule up and then go, okay, at the end of the day,
Mhm.
I'll do A, B, and C. But
And
you
at
have
the end of the day, we're too dang tired.
like you say, your me time ends up being sleep time, right?
Exactly, exactly.
So
So
yeah,
what I
yeah.
would say, whatever you can do. I mean, Dr. Lisa is mentioning belly dancing. Maybe it is just a dance party in your kitchen or your living room while you're making dinner or after dinner while you're doing the dishes or something like that. Or maybe it is a walk. If it's
Mhm.
if after your meal, or as I say, maybe you just walk around the house a little bit between.
Yeah.
You just reclaim your right to be a full human being, not just a robot, or what I'm jokingly these days calling a zombie.
Yeah. Just joy,
So
like we said earlier, joyful movement, things that
yes,
make your heart sing. Right.
yes, for sure.
And then that spirit will start to kind of flow through you. That second chakra will start to open up, and you
Mhm.
really reconnect. And then you'll start to desire more of it, especially if you're desiring of a baby, right? Because that natural response, the
Yeah,
natural mother response, will start to show up. But we have to, it's just like anything. We have to make room for
right.
whatever it is that we desire, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And yes, all of these movements give circulation to our pelvic bowl, which
Yes.
is where this baby will live,
Mhm.
goddess willing. And so, really connecting with ourselves that way, sort of getting a little bit out of our, a frontal lobe and
Yeah.
into our feeling body will be wonderful. And guess what? It lowers cortisol.
Yes,
Back to the
exactly.
cortisol connection, it lowers
Exactly.
cortisol.
And
So,
and and doing it even while you're pregnant, right? And so
mhm,
we're
mhm.
not just talking about taking on this lifestyle to conceive,
Mhm.
but we're also talking about trying to have a healthy baby because there's so many, and a healthy pregnancy and
Mhm.
a fun pregnancy, right? Because
Mhm.
I have a couple of patients who had twins, and
Mhm.
their doctors had to say leave work, right? Because you're way past the time. And they're like, yeah, but I feel so great, right? So it just depends. And oh, and that's another thing,
Yeah.
that the cortisol response and how the adrenals, um, what the health of the adrenals can also help dictate that, especially that first trimester. If I can get someone's adrenal glands happy and healthy and in balance, then the likelihood of morning sickness
Mhm.
will be much lower, right? So
Mhm.
that's what I've noticed in my work, because the hormones flow so much easier, and the digestion and all the things that are responsible, right, for partially responsible that. So of course we're also using herbs and
Mhm.
teas and things to
Mhm.
support, but not one patient that I've had that I've had the chance to work for a good amount of time, for at least 3 months or so, to balance their hormones ahead of time. Not one had, I mean, they had joyful pregnancies,
Yes,
not one had
beautiful.
hormone.
And yes, I mean, a joyful pregnancy means quite likely, because that baby is growing his or her own nervous system and imprints on how he or she will live in the world. So
Yeah,
it's for pregnancy, it's for the health and harmony of the baby, and it's
yeah,
then because we are genetically pre-programming future generations. It's for your grandchildren, for that matter, because your shift to a healthier way of living affects the next few generations. So if we what we can't do for ourselves, we can say, uh-oh, I'll do it then for my child and my grandchild. So if
yeah.
that's what it takes, so be it, because everybody wins.
And even the household experiences the change, right?
Exactly.
A lot of patterns have to be taught, right?
Yes.
And so the me time is one thing. You might end up, if you already have children, you might say, okay, my me time is in the closet for a few minutes so they can't find me. But over time,
That's right.
but
That's
over
right.
time, it becomes like mommy's me time, right? Or
Mhm, mhm.
or
And
it's just
yeah.
as nice. It's just nice to be able to add it back and to reconnect with.
Absolutely. And we're teaching the children that, they too can and should claim me time, downtime,
Yeah.
breathing time, reconnecting time, because they're naturally there, but likewise, like us, they can get spun out into the external world. This
And
has
don't.
been such a fun conversation. And then I'm going to just suggest that possibly
Mhm.
what you do is, you'll do your testing, you'll do
Yeah.
all of the things, and then do you retest in order to
Yeah.
say, yes, indeed, our
So
things are having an effect?
so this is the beautiful part about it. I probably haven't had to retest maybe 20%,
Hmm.
because before we can even get a chance to retest, they're pregnant.
Lovely, lovely. And
Right.
again, signs and symptoms, it's like if you're running on cortisol and your adrenals are kind of, struggling, and
Yes.
you know that you're not feeling well, you
Yes.
get them balanced and you feel well. So you don't really need to retest. If you're
Yeah.
kind of, data driven, then sure, go ahead and retest just to prove it to yourself that you are feeling well.
And we're not going to test actually after pregnancy,
Right,
right? And
right.
so many of them are happy not to not to
Not to
retest
have to take
because
the
now
test.
that because now they're
Mission
pregnant.
accomplished.
Yes, yes.
Wonderful. Well, I want to be respectful of your time and the listeners' time. Is there anything and it's been such a fun conversation. And I know we kind of took a few tributaries, but
Yeah.
they were important ones. But is
Mhm.
there anything that you want to make sure you impart before we wrap it up here?
Yeah, I believe that cortisol, hormones, fertility, it's just one big, beautiful cascade, right? Um, I love to rely on numbers because I'm doing the work to see where you are in the balance. But there's so many things that you'll know internally, like your intuition that says this is out of balance or I need to do this work. Rely very much on your intuition if that's something you're connected with, or try to get more connected to intuition.
Mhm.
Feel where your body is aching and feel where things are different, and don't listen to someone that's going to tell you no, your lab's normal, or no, you're not feeling that. You be your own best advocate, and really rely on that self understanding, right? Because I feel like when people especially are struggling with fertility, and even taking the injections and doing things, they kind of get disconnected and not and they don't really feel as much because everybody's kind of telling them what to do.
Yeah.
Go back to that feeling space and really know that you know what's best because you're in your body every day. You're the best you know you
Right.
better than anyone else, right? And so don't just hand over your power to other people. Make sure that you keep that power and you understand it and use that power because that intuition is really, really powerful.
Absolutely. I often will say to a patient, remember, we work for you.
Yes.
We
Yeah.
work for you and your ovaries and your uterus and your
And
pregnancy. We may come to working for you with a set of, knowledge that you're relying on, but that doesn't make us the boss of you.
that's
So
right.
you've lived
That's
in your body your whole life. You are the driver of your life and your future, and we're happy to help however we can.
yeah.
Yeah, this has been a beautiful conversation. I'm so grateful that you came to talk with us and teach us today about the adrenal cortisol connection and some tips and tricks on how to either test and or implement strategies to improve. And your information will be in the show notes. So if people want to reach out to you, they can reach you. And don't forget about the book, Stop Stressing Me Out. I love that. And then so I hope that we have a chance to come back at another time and further the conversation. Maybe down the road we'll have one on pregnancy,
Yeah.
because the listeners here, goddess willing, will want to know now what? I'm pregnant, now what? So we'll talk about that then.
Yeah.
Until then, we will say, as we do at the close of all of our Health University episodes, class dismissed.